As Jeff said, I think I do keep that ex-CISO word up there because I think it's very important. For the first time in my career, I've been in the vendor community all of my career. I was actually responsible for deploying technology, for actually buying software rather than selling software. And I'm now of the opinion that everybody should do their time in the trenches, should do their time actually being responsible for what you guys do, actually deploying the technology, deploy their own technologies internally. And it was actually a very, very good learning exercise. But I'm actually here today to really talk about what I've learned through that exercise and what we believe at SailPoint is critical in putting identity at the center of a zero trust network. Now, I'm going to start the presentation perhaps with a rather strange image. It's this one actually of Yosemite National Park. A beautiful picture late in the day, and if you don't know, that's actually America's tallest waterfall there in the back of the picture. But the zero trust in this picture is actually the guy on the left there, leaning over the precipice. His name is Alex Honnold, and he's very possibly the most amazing climber alive anywhere in the world today. In fact, I would say he's revolutionized climbing, and he's actually done it by adopting a zero trust approach. Now, to explain, Alex actually specializes in a very high-risk form of climbing that's called free solo. And if you're not familiar with the term, free solo actually means climbing without a rope, no rope there for that poor guy, no safety net underneath him, and it quite literally is one mistake and death. That's an unfortunate fact. I have to say, most climbers don't free solo. I'm a climber myself, and I absolutely never climb without a rope. Even in the world of extreme climbing, free solo, it's a radical pursuit. There's no question. In fact, I think it's fair to actually call it a death wish in many ways. Literally, nowhere to go but climb up or fall down. And if you can just take a moment to just look at that picture, can you imagine what that must feel like? I mean, that's 2,000 feet sheer granite. Every time he breathes, it pushes him off the rock face slightly. Pretty scary place to be. And look, no hands. I mean, is he crazy? I mean, is he crazy? Is he just stupid? I mean, what is it with this guy? As I say, you know, I climb myself, and I'm used to heights, but when I look closely at that picture, it actually makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Really quite scary even to people that climb. Now, late last year, National Geographic actually produced a movie about Alex, and it was called aptly Free Solo, and it tracked his attempt to be the first person to free solo the iconic El Capitan, one of the most fantastic rock faces anywhere in the world. If you've not seen the movie, it's on Netflix. Take a look and actually watch it, because it'll probably turn your stomach. It really is that kind of a movie when you actually watch it. Very physical reaction. But what's actually fascinating about the movie is it documents and gives a little window into the psychology of what Alex Honnold actually does. And surprisingly, even to me to some degree, what looks like crazy risk and stupidity, you might say, plain stupidity, is actually very carefully calculated, and it's meticulously executed. It's not what you think. Because for Alex, free solo isn't blind trust or anything unmanaged in any way. It's highly managed. It's a very, very precise activity, because he absolutely leaves nothing to chance. Because what he does, it's not a death wish, it's much more of a dissertation when you look at what this guy actually has to do. And before he embarks on a major free solo project, he actually climbs every inch of the rock face hundreds of times with the protection of a rope. And he literally spends thousands of hours working a route, understanding the climb, planning every section, and every single move. He carefully assesses every single handhold and every single foot placement. Every single one of them is cataloged, risk assessed, and carefully documented. And for El Capitan, he actually selected, retained, and successfully retrieved in his memory. Gives you a little clue to the successful conclusion to that movie. Literally thousands of individual risk-assessed moves. His climb, absolutely not random. It was incredible preparation, and that's a word we'll come back to. It was amazing control, another word we'll come back to. And it was flawless, zero trust execution. And so for me, his discipline and his approach, which is very risk-based, is very closely aligned with the topic of zero trust security within identity and within general IT security. Before I go any further, let me first just actually make sure that everybody's on the same page with what zero trust actually means. It's a term that's much used today. The term was actually first coined by John Kindervag back in 2010 when he was actually at Forrester. And he used the term to describe basically a different way of thinking about enterprise security. If we're honest, and as an ex-CISO myself, look at the space we're in, a catalog of vulnerability and exploitation. And I think the question for most honest people is not if something's going to happen. It really is a case of when it's going to happen. And so John and the others coined this phrase in an attempt to have us all really start to think about this from a different perspective. And zero trust literally says, assume for a moment that the network is compromised. And let's ask ourselves a very important question. What would you do different right now if you thought that the device you were on was compromised? It says, let's not rely on the network to keep us safe. And I think to give an analogy, that would be like telling Alex to just go climb, right? Just go, buddy, you'll be fine. Right? Not what we want to do. Instead, let's accept that there is an extreme amount of risk in our environment and let's deal with it. Let's get out there, you might say, with the safety of that rope and understand what's there, learn and manage the risk that's available. And so in this sense, zero trust, excuse me, literally says change the way we think about the problem in the first place. Because zero trust is an approach, it's not a product. We all like to use those words with the product. Ooh, that's tricky. Nighttime. That's maybe desirable. You've all disappeared from me, but that's okay. It's not a product or a security protocol. It really is a way of thinking. It does say assume that the network is hostile, and of course, that doesn't mean just giving up on network security. No one suggests that we just open up the door and let the bad guys in. That would just be insane. But it does simply mean accepting the fact that the adversary can and ultimately will see our assets. If you think about where we were trying to hide the assets from the adversary. That was really our goal. And as soon as we accept the fact that the adversary can see the assets and we focus on delivering controls and governance over who gets access to what. It does say catalog your people and your devices, right? So understand the user access patterns that are happening. So where people are coming from, where they're going to, what they're trying to connect to. And build a very important term, context. Build an understanding of who should have access and more importantly, why they need that access. Zero Trust very specifically says, to me, build application level boundaries. That is my term, that's not John's term. By it, I mean step back from the network perimeter and focus on application level access controls and governance. And get really good at AppSec, right? That's what we're defending. We're defending the application. And again, like maybe Alex preparing for El Capitan, it says focus on the details beforehand, right? So understand and ultimately manage fine-grained access controls and entitlement, because Zero Trust is all about understanding and managing that risk that comes from our fine-grained access. And so it obviously sounds super self-serving for an identity crew like we have here. We're all in the identity space. But ultimately, taking a zero trust approach really does mean making identity and access management an absolute core discipline. And so 100% agree with Jim that the future of security at every level within an organization is going to be interchanged with identity and access for sure. Okay, so that's a basic view of zero trust, at least my view. But if we get really practical here, this is a bunch of folks that do understand identity quite well, and some of you understand our products. So what does identity governance driving zero trust actually mean in deployment? And to answer this question, I'm actually going to highlight three specific things that we do in identity governance that are pillars that quite literally support a zero trust approach, and they are implementing true least privilege, and I use the word true very specifically, building and maturing model-based life cycles, and delivering predictive controls. And I'll jump into each of them and at least give you my perspective on what's required. Now, we'll start with least privilege. I think if there is a zero trust Bible, which I believe there is such a book, then this is Genesis chapter 1. I think we've all talked about least privilege for many years, at least I have, both academically and practically. It's something much talked about. And I hope that everybody understands that at the highest level, we're back. At the highest level, it simply means, I quite liked it actually, it was kind of see, there's always one. See, zero trust, we didn't know that was there, we didn't come and catalog it, what can we expect? It means only giving people the access they need to get their job done, right? So it's quite a simple definition. But the question is, how do we apply that principle to zero trust? And the answer starts inevitably with inventory and visibility. And the old mantra that which we've used in systems management forever, that you can't manage what you can't see, is absolutely spot on here. You absolutely have to understand who has access to what and why they have it. If you don't, at least zero trust has absolutely no chance. And I think just like, again, Alex, on that free solo of El Capitan, before we can adopt a zero trust approach, we have to survey that climb. We have to follow and understand where the risks actually live. And we have to make ready and understand that a least privilege for zero trust requires an entitlement catalog and a full inventory of access. It absolutely depends on visibility. Again, you can't manage what you can't see. You have to understand that current state. What do people have access to? How are they getting that access? And of course, that means an inventory, right? And that is the first step in an identity governance program and project. I would hope for most of you, that is the first step. So what I'm highlighting here is that for anybody considering a zero trust approach to security, it's the first step here too. Actually inventory everything you have. The second support for least privilege for zero trust is around least access. Kind of a strange use of the term. And by that I mean providing access in the first place in a different way. We're all very focused on providing, on provisioning, right? The most access we possibly can. At least that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, right? I'm an enabler, a provisioner, a provider. That's what we do. It's about what we can give out. So what does that mean? Well, let's get quite practical, right? I'll give you an example. Who here is doing an access review? I'm sure many of you have done an access review. Actually think revoke by default, right? Is that the primary thought of mind? Is let's take things away. Let's think least privilege, least access. It's not what we do. Or if we're doing role mining, right? Or birthright access, if we're doing modeling for birthright access, are we focusing on the least amount of access possible. So the closest peer group, or the highest match criteria, or the smallest access profile. Which again, it's not really how we tend to think of it. A successful role has lots of things in it, right? The more in it, the better. Because the point here is, if we're really going to support zero trust, we have to give out less by default. It really is as simple as that. Give out less by default. Sounds a strange thing, but that only makes sense to give out less by default if you have awesome self-service and delegation. Right? So we have to deliver intelligent self-service and effective delegation, the ability for managers and managers of managers to provide access. And it has to have behind it a fully automated provisioning, approval and controls lifecycle, really quite simply. And yes, I know we do that today in products just like ours, right? That's pretty much the run-of-the-mill access requests. It's kind of what we do. But what we're really saying here is we've got to add to it something more real-time and something which is more peer group oriented with analysis and recommendations within the offerings. And the result, what we've done in our product, is to add identity AI. And so my colleague Dana will be talking a little more about how we use that technology to basically create a much better user experience and support zero trust in a much more significant way along the road. The second pillar, a little bit more academic, is this model-based lifecycle. This one's very important for zero trust. It's also a key differentiator in the provisioning and governance market. It's certainly what separates a first or second generation provisioning solution from the others, and it's very important to identity governance. And a model-based lifecycle means putting well-known and well-understood and well-managed governance models at the center of the access lifecycle. And yes, that very often does mean RBAC, role-based access control. So building roles and maintaining them through their lifecycle, which is probably more important than building them. But it also means other types of models as well, models that can help capture the desired state. How should things look? How should things be configured? And so that can be as simple as ownership and approval definitions, right, that can overlay responsibility on top of everything, right? All the things we care about should have ownership and responsibility and control cycles on them. And it can also mean things like triggers and change controls, right? So our ability to put out a defined set of control processes whenever a state changes in anything. Any state change, here's a trigger, and here's a control process, a model-based control process. And maybe the governance model is something as simple as a clean set of requestable units of access. Right? We don't think of that as being complex governance models, but they absolutely are clearly articulated requestable units of access. So self-service can be made available to the right people at the right time to get the right access. Quite simple. And these are all basically fine-grained entitlement models, and they're the things that drive a governance-based approach to identity. And I think for us in this room, we have to commit, because it is a commitment, to model the governance state, the desired state, in advance, if we plan to minimize the risk and, like Alex, know what's happening, know what's out there, and stand a chance of supporting true zero trust. One of the other ways we can further minimize the risk and adopt a zero trust approach is by employing embedded controls. So we have to take the checks and balances of business best practice, the kind of things we talk about, separation of duty, and embed them in the request and provisioning flow. So again, nothing radically new here, right? I guess something we talk about in the dedicated space of identity governance, that's our motherhood and apple pie, you might say. So I think it's our job as identity governance people to evangelize to the rest of the security organization that before you can adopt a zero trust approach, you have to understand things like separation of duty. You have to absolutely understand who should have access when it's compared to another piece of access. And that should be absolutely required for a zero trust approach. And lastly, in a model-based approach, we have to understand exactly when the attributes drive the access. And I've got the air quotes for anyone that's very deliberately, because I know this sounds a little fuzzy. So when I say the attributes drive the access, I very specifically mean when any system makes an access policy decision that's based on identity data, yeah, that's pretty clear. Any access policy decision is based on identity data. Controls and governance have to be in place over it. Let me give you an example. This is one that's very close to home for SailPoint. This is something within our own product. It's standard practice within a SailPoint deployment. Anyone that's done one, probably done this very thing. To take an HR attribute like job code and to use that to define access to a business role via a role assignment rule. Okay? This is a great SailPoint example of where the attribute is driving the access. Pretty simple, right? Give you another example, maybe a little more distant. When a managed target system like AWS, it picks up an attribute from an identity provider somewhere else in the ecosystem, right? It embeds that in, say, here, an S3 access policy. The attribute is defining the access, right? I mean, that's quite plain to see. Another example, when Azure takes an account attribute like location and uses it to protect a OneDrive folder, pretty standard practice, and it does it with a dynamic group. I assume everyone here knows dynamic groups in Active Directory, pretty much a standard recommended feature. The attribute is defining the access. So how do you run provisioning for that? Kind of interesting question. Put on the hat of the auditor for a second, right? How do you define and implement controls for that? How do you govern that? You know, who manages the attribute provenance? We were discussing this before the session today. Very interesting, careful use of the word provenance. Go look it up. It implies, where do the attributes come from? Are they accurate? Who can see them? Are they up to date? They are the access. Does everyone know that the attribute is driving the access? This is a missing link for many people. You know, are those attributes being reviewed and audited? Because they're access control. And it's a very interesting. Is there policy and rule lifecycle? Okay, because if that policy changes, the access changes, right? I mean, it's pretty black and white. It actually does. You change the policy, the access has changed. Did I certify that? Is there change control over that policy? Right? And is that change control going to meet an audit? And these are very, very important questions for anyone taking an attribute-based approach to access or for the future of identity, basically. So I personally foresee a zero trust future where the provenance and assurance of identity attributes and runtime access policies become a key governance control. I don't see any way we're going to avoid that because it is the access. The time, I think, is most definitely coming when we're going to be doing identity subject and attribute access reviews. And I think that you know, the policies that define dynamic access will need to be under full lifecycle control for the governance infrastructure. Again, I don't see any way we're going to be able to avoid that from a controls perspective. And so to the third and final pillar of identity governance supporting zero trust approach, it's predictive controls. And this is some really cool technology that we've been driving at SailPoint, and something that after the break, my colleague Dana is going to give you a better picture of. It's basically our own big data machine learning AI platform. And we plug it into our base identity assignment lifecycle engine and to key parts of the IAM infrastructure. And we use it to anticipate user access needs, to spot risky use of identity governance tooling, so when something's being used in a risky way, to enhance the governance models, So to make those desired state models and policies much more efficient, effective, and real-time aware, to reduce our admin costs and to enhance the overall user experience. Applying zero trust here literally means dynamic approvals, something we can actually do, something that's much more dynamic, and our remediations are there to help us better make access approval decisions, and importantly, do them faster, right? The world's moving faster. And we have to ensure that our governance processes are just enriched, really, with a lot more context, a lot more recommendations, and a lot more intelligence. And that's what the platform's there to do. We can then also leverage that platform to enhance our models, as I say, our baselines and norms. So understanding what is normal access can be then used to enhance the desired state. The desired state is normal, right, which is what we're looking for. And that can allow us to be more real-time and more automated in our provisioning processes as well. And all of this predictive identity basically leads us to smarter governance. Governance that's going to be more data-based, more machine-driven, and oriented around a real-time context. You'll hear us talking a lot more about real-time rather than admin or audit time. And because it's that timing and that context that's going to drive zero trust for the future. Now, before I close, I'm going to come back to that first pillar again for our lovely least privilege, because this one is so important for zero trust that I want to leave, I think, what, at least for my colleagues, for my product teams, and for you, is a challenge, basically. I want to ask the question, are we really doing enough to truly support least privilege? Are you committed to this topic? I most certainly am. I'll give you a very good example. I no longer walk around with all my credit cards. I have one credit card, I have 2 passports and 1 passport. I used to carry them all, right? I'm doing my own bit for least privilege. But let me give you a slightly more radical thought. Maybe when we're talking about providing access as provisioners in the first place, we should be talking about something that I'll call dissolving entitlement. Just think about it. This could be the ultimate control. Just imagine that everything we provisioned simply dissolved away. Kind of interesting thought, right? Imagine that every entitlement hit a preset sunset date, so a predefined control barrier, and basically got suspended. That would be least privilege, right? I mean, we would be taking away access rather than adding access. You get Salesforce for the day or the week, and then it has to be reapproved, re-asked for, recovered, right? Interesting thought. Does this sound like some sort of strange recertification? I have people in this space that is that recertification? But maybe this could remove the need for us ever to do a recertification again, right? And I appreciate that there's people here that are long-running, even some of my own colleagues, long-running identity governance practitioners that kind of, shake their head here a little bit and say, gee, come on, that's not possible. But it is, with the power of a smart identity, predictive identity governance engine, it really is doable. And let me prove a case with a silly example with this scenario. So Michael, aka Steve Carell, he is the world's best boss, in case you didn't know. He's a funny guy. But he spends all of his week in the office with the access he needs to get his job done. Obviously, most of the time that means insulting his employees, if you see the series. But whenever he goes to access an application, a predictive governance engine, right, it finds the right level of access and it dynamically provisions it for him. Okay, so he starts the week with very little. He finishes it with a collection of access that has been carefully checked against his peers, very importantly, against his attributes, which we know are correct, and against his context. Next week he goes on vacation on some nice looking white sandy beach with what looks like a strawberry daiquiri or something over there. And after the 2 weeks of vacation, he comes back into the office. And while he's been gone, all of his access and his entitlements, not all, most, are simply dissolved. So all he's left with is basic network access. We let him onto the network with his strong authentication token, and we just leave him at an SSO launchpad where he can attempt to make access and provide requests over the future. So, as you say, some people here probably roll their eyes and go, that's never going to work. My execs are never going to allow that. My mission leaders are never going to allow comfort. But this is where that predictive engine can come in, right? Because we've got that intelligent process. We can simply put it back before he even knows it went away. When he clicks to launch to the application, we can do something about it. We can use the power of a predictive identity engine to trigger a response based on his attributes, his integrity, and his runtime context, right, which is something we have. We know we've got the right guy, right? We've got him authenticated. We know he's trying to make the right access to the right applications because we knew what he had before, right? We have that history. So we can run automatic approvals, and we can kick off dynamic provisioning, and we can put in place those embedded controls, and we can put the right least privilege back in place. And we can, in doing so, perhaps make zero trust least privilege a deployment reality rather than an academic principle. So you can see, if we can leverage the power of knowledge and intelligence, we can take a new predictive-based approach to managing the future of zero trust. And in doing so, we can look forward to a world where the right people truly have the right access at exactly the right time. That's it.
Any questions for Darran?
Was I early? Very well.
I want to get your perspective on the regarding the dark web. Do you think there will ever be a solution-based methodology of how to attack the dark web, because it is destroying not only our economy but worldwide economies? Just want to get your perspective.
So if I mean, the question is how to do something about the. I'm the entertainment while the chairs come. To do something about the dark web. Yeah, I think we are doing something about it. I think most progressive security programs have a reach out into that environment, whether it's, have I been pwned? Looking for passwords and users that have been exfiltrated, or whether you're doing full-on programmatic surveillance. It's becoming commercialized by many vendors, and I think it's an unfortunate fact of where we live in the world today. Great example, when Ashley Madison, I don't know if you guys remember that, 2 years back, very unfortunate, not the website anyone wants to have their username found at. I hope first thing we did was look at that user population from the dark web and match it up against all of our customers of our SaaS application. Not for any privacy reasons, because if the password is exfiltrated there, it's possibly exfiltrated for their access to identity now. Just simple observation, and I think knowledge is power. So whether we'll do something governmentally, I don't believe we will, at least in this country or in Europe. I think there's some places they will, but.
Just a follow-up, why do you think there's no action from the public sector?
I just think jurisdiction of control, how can you, I think the level of instrumented oversight you have to have in place to prevent the dark web is, and some of it's good. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever looked at Shodan. I mean, if you don't, Shodan is a database of resources on the internet. I mean, it's shocking. It will catalog any device that is on the internet for you. So I'll sometimes talk to an oil and gas customer, and they'll say, "Oh, we've got air gap networks, and none of our, we don't have governance controls over our core infrastructure because it's air gapped." And then you go look in Shodan, and some of their programmable logic controllers are listed in Shodan, right? They're on the internet. Therefore, they're under attack. So some of it is very useful, and it's just a delicate balance, I think. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like your perspective on the work that NIST is doing. I'd like your perspective on the work that NIST is doing. They have a special publication out for zero trust architecture, and I'd really be interested in the perspective you have on that effort.
I think, unfortunately, Paul Grassi was going to be with us today. He couldn't. He used to be at NIST, and Paul and I worked on a number of the NIST pubs in and around attribute. I think NIST always does a fantastic job of qualifying and laying out a base for a base of understanding and a base of obligation. So in most NIST special pubs, I think any security practitioner that doesn't know what they are doesn't know what they're doing. And so I think the zero trust directives, at least that I've read, are well articulated and have a good coverage. I don't personally believe they're identity centric enough, but that's my job, right? I'm supposed to be the identity guy, right? So I'm more specifically the identity governance guy.
I'll put the plug in. I spoke with the authors recently, and they took the cutoff for comments about 2 weeks ago as more of a guidance than a hard line. They're going to do another iteration. Excellent. So if there's anybody that's interested in commenting, take the draft that's out there and just send your comments in now. You don't have to wait for the next
And I would advocate this group of people, that's what you should be doing. You should be the identity voice within security at large. And I think one of the mistakes we've made is to think early part of the evolution of this life cycle is to assume what we do is operational. It's just IT ops. It's not, it's the center of security. It is the only thing that controls the access. So let's manage it. Oh yeah, we've got to, very quickly, because
Thank you.
We have people with chairs.
Hi, staying in the NIST environment for a minute.
Bring you guys up.
The new or the emerging CMMC certification requirements and their implications toward those of us that are government contractors, do you think that's a mechanism for, they go beyond NIST 800-171.
Right.
How do you see that affecting the market, affecting the way we talk about all this, and affecting how we actually implement new infrastructures?
I think it's very difficult. Again, I put on that CISO's hat. It's very easy for me as a vendor to read what the spec says, to think what that means in a product, stick it in a product, and I'm done. You've got to continually evaluate yourself against that as a broader set of operational capabilities. I think it's good to be pushed. I think everyone needs a push. And sometimes where NIST drives a hard line, I think sometimes it's pushing us in the right direction. At the end of the day, I personally believe people say that security should be invisible. I think it should be like the health warning on the side of a packet of cigarettes. It should be pretty damn ugly, and it should be in your face, right? Because it's the only way security doesn't go away. It has to be a conscious effort of everybody participating in it. So we need a push sometimes. So we can talk more directly about it specifically. I think I need to get off the stage.
Thank you, Darran.
Thank you.
Thank you. Darran,